Hi, how are you?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining. Your story, I was reading your articles and your whole diagnosis situation, your husband and everything. Wow, what a story. I want to hear about your children's book, but can you just tell me a little more about how you were struggling to diagnose your daughter and how that ended up with your own diagnosis?
Yeah, so when my younger daughter was 2 years old, I knew that there was something wrong because she had these 45-minute meltdowns, these crying fits, and she did have a language delay, and so she had been diagnosed with a language disorder. But I knew it was more than that because there were just so many things that would set off these meltdowns. And so I started doing a lot of research, and I spent hundreds of hours, and that alone just like my ability to kind of obsessively focus on something that turned out to be like one of the characteristics of autism spectrum disorder that a lot of people share. But so what I realized on that sort of research heavy exploration, trying to figure out what was going on with my daughter, I realized that the only thing that really made sense with all of the things that I noticed with her, like her obsessive interests, her need for routines, her social skills, like difficulty with social situations, and all of those things were things that I had shared as well. So I realized that not only was she autistic, but I was too. And then it was a matter of trying to get the diagnosis because a lot of times girls mask their autistic traits unknowingly, like I had my whole life, where there's things like eye contact that we can imitate. If you're higher on the spectrum, sometimes you don't necessarily have those stereotypical features like flapping hands and lack of eye contact. Sometimes, like my daughter and I, we didn't necessarily have those things that stuck out as being autistic. So when I took her to specialists, we went to a pediatrician and a developmental pediatrician. And it wasn't until we got to a clinical psychologist that was more familiar with the gender differences with autism that we were both able to get our diagnosis.
Wow, wow. And so what was it like? What was it like for you figuring out, like putting all of the things about yourself into some sort of tidy little bucket after a lifetime of not having that sort of framework in which to think about yourself?
Well, for me, actually, it was a relief because honestly, I had struggled in a lot of ways throughout my life. And it was the little things like I was selectively mute, which meant that I only communicated a lot with close family members. So I would be sitting in classrooms fairly silent and didn't really communicate that well. I spent a lot of time reading books and kind of immersing myself in this sort of internal battle that I had that I didn't realize why these things were happening, like why things were so difficult for me. So once I got that diagnosis, it explained a lot and helped me to not only understand how to better help my kids, because I could sort of think about the things that were hard for me growing up, and the way I parent sort of changed, knowing that things that I had experienced and what I had done to help myself, I could teach my kids.
Wow. And then your son also was diagnosed at age 2. Did I get that right?
Yeah, so a year later, we took my son back to the same clinical psychologist who diagnosed him. One of the things that was interesting, as I mentioned, the gender differences with autism. So he had more of the stereotypical features, like flapping his hands when he was excited and had less eye contact, even though his was still, he still has low support needs compared to some others that are on the autism spectrum. But he had more of those stereotypical features that made it easier for him to get his diagnosis. And statistically, for every 4 boys diagnosed, only 1 girl is diagnosed. And
Mhm.
it's a lot of researchers think that that women and girls are often overlooked for a diagnosis, partly because they tend to mask their autistic traits.
So if you're a parent and you have a daughter and what should you look for to make sure you haven't missed this? Like what might you not know?
Well, I think there's a lot of different things that are affected with autism spectrum disorder. It's kind of hard to pinpoint it to one thing. So normally, if there's a lot of areas in which that would include things like social interactions, language. So if you see issues in those areas, as well as things like having difficulty with changing routines, like for example, my daughter, she likes things to be She likes to know ahead of time what she's doing and doesn't like if we change things at the last minute. She's not flexible. So, for example, things like if she always gets her sandwich cut a certain way, if I were to change that, that could, result in a meltdown. And I also like to tell parents that ask me about this, what is it? They'll often say, what's the difference between a toddler tantrum and a meltdown, like an autistic meltdown? And I would say that, like in my own experience, having had them and also having kids that have them, normally with a toddler tantrum or just a tantrum in general, kids tantrum, often like it'll be set off by maybe like they lose something, and then if you give that back, or if you're at a grocery store and they want you to buy something and you won't buy it, they might have a tantrum about that. But if you actually were to give them that, what they asked for, that would normally end the tantrum. Or if they got a toy taken away, if you were to give it back, that might end the tantrum. But with an autistic meltdown, it's more like a switch that goes off in your brain. It's like you can't come back from it. It's an emotional regulation. So it's like if something that my daughter, something upsets her, it could even be like sensory issues that set it off, like lights or loud noises. If she goes into an autistic meltdown, I can't just calm her down immediately. I can take her out of the situation and she may eventually come down from that. But she's not going to just immediately be fine, if she just gets what she wants.
Got it. So tell me about the book quickly. I know I took up all your time asking you about, but I found that so interesting. So tell me about writing this children's book.
So Too Sticky, it's a book illustrated by Joanne Lou Freithoff, and it came out in April with Albert Whitman. It's a book about an autistic girl who has trouble with sensory issues. She has to overcome her fear of sticky hands so that she can participate in a slime experiment at school.
Very cool. And what made you write the book? I mean, obviously your experience, but I mean, why make it into a book at all?
Well, I wanted to write a book, especially about an autistic girl, to raise awareness about the autistic girls often being underdiagnosed for autism spectrum disorder. And I made 3 of the characters in the book are actually named after my kids. So I wrote it primarily for them. I wanted them to be able to see themselves in a book. There aren't a lot of books written from the perspective of an autistic child. So I wanted it to be from that perspective. And then I actually drew on both my own and my daughter's experiences to write the book.
Wow, that's so great. Well, thank you so much for sharing your experience and for your book and for helping the countless families out there who are going through this or who might have missed a diagnosis and because of you can identify it a little better and even about themselves because it's never too late. So thank you for bringing that to my attention and everybody else's. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. Bye.
Bye.